Welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. So many of those headlines these days have had to do with challenges and opportunities in public education in New Haven. And behind those headlines, the person making such a difference and bringing so much fresh perspective and energy to these challenges is Leslie Blatteau, president of New Haven Federation of Teachers. That's still what's called?
Yes, that's what we're called.
Still, yeah. Because I know, wasn't there a time when the name changed or no?
No, New Haven Federation of Teachers, Local 933.
All right, all the way back to when there was the strike in the 70s and people got arrested and stuff.
I believe so, yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, Leslie Blatteau, welcome back to Dateline New Haven. I love when you come in and you made a special effort today. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks, Paul.
And happy snow day.
Yes, happy snow day to teachers, students, school staff. I know that we're enjoying it.
And
I hope we're
enjoying it. What does it mean
it.
for you? Like, what time did you find out? One teacher told me this morning he didn't find out till midnight last night.
Well, I found out because, it's interesting that you asked, because this time around, how we found out was different than usual. Usually we get a robocall from New Haven Public Schools, but this time around it came from 946-7669, which is a city call, and it was the mayor himself who announced it.
And it was just a roundup, or was it just school announcement?
So that was a roundup, but we heard school was closed and hung up. I assumed it was parking bans and whatnot.
So that one was only at like 6 or 7 p.m.
That was about 6 o'clock, but not all of our teachers got it because they're not necessarily New Haven residents.
Something
right.
Bridge, Everbridge.
But then Keisha Red Hannon's assistant superintendent, and then she did another call and an email out to staff, and then it trickles out from there.
What time was that?
That was shortly after, maybe about an hour or two after the mayor's call.
I was wondering why this guy didn't find out till midnight.
Yeah, and I already actually received an email from one of my building stewards saying teachers want to know how they can get signed back up on that list. And I think it's a matter of reaching out to the help desk, but I have to double check. So I will double check.
For Everbridge, you mean?
No, this is for NHPS. There's a lot of different lists for NHPS of parents get robocalls, teachers get robocalls, and we just have to make sure that people have their updated info in there so they can be on that first to know list when there is a cancellation or a delay.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Leslie, how communication changed since you and I were coming up. I mean, people listen to the radio. Everyone here listens to
We had a call number
WLA.
from my school.
And you had to wait. Okay, so you're a tiny bit younger than I am, maybe. I mean, because even here in the 70s and 80s and 90s, people were waiting on ELI. I remember I was working at
no.
ELI.
And when I say a call number, not a phone call number, our school had a code number. So we had to listen for our code on the radio.
They could watch TV where there was the crawl, but they did the whole state.
Yep.
And I remember that was the big thing. I remember one principal, as you said, when he was at a bar where he heard a familiar voice, and it was the guy from ELI. He used to read, and he gave him a free beer, said, "Thank you so much." He thought he was the one who let them know he had the day off. It's pretty funny.
Oh, no, it was a rite of passage for sure of listening for that call on the radio.
But now there's such efficient ways to target people, like Everbridge, those recordings with the city. You have the phone tree. It seemed to be that it should be quicker, no? I mean, it seemed not that hard now.
I think it's a matter of data management, too, of just making sure that that our updated phone numbers and email addresses are in the systems that NHPS is using so that we can get that information. I mean, once a few teachers get it, though, you can rest assured that most teachers will hear. We're pretty good at spreading the word on these kinds of things.
And then you're a teacher and a parent of a public school student, correct?
Yep.
So how do you feel about snow days as both? Because sometimes when remember my kids were young, I used to sometimes worry. It'd be fun to be with them. It's that special. But, if you had work obligations, it was kind of stressful getting them someplace to go.
It can be stressful. I mean, when I was a full-time classroom teacher, I would revel in the snow day with my daughter because the schoolwork could wait. And we could pick up the piles of grading at 7 o'clock, after dinner, and just enjoy the day. Now in my role as president of the Teachers Union, I work a lot more and at more, just more consistent hours. So I did have to find childcare for her to come here because we had this planned already.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the cartoons, childcare is helpful in the morning as I was pushing out emails to organize folks for a public hearing tomorrow up at Hartford.
And tell me about that public hearing tomorrow.
So tomorrow, the Education Committee is having a public hearing, and there's a laundry list of bills, 10 or 11 bills. We're focusing on 3 tomorrow. One is going to address class size and eventually require boards of ed to lower class size over the course of the next few years, which would be fabulous. Another is CEA is taking the lead on this, but it's
That's
something.
the Connecticut Education Association, not your union.
Yep.
American Federation of Teachers.
Yeah. We're both unions are statewide and part of national federations. But CEA has taken the lead on this one, which is in pushing the state to reflect more on the impact of high stakes testing. And that we've had conversations about that. And I was looking at CEA's policy brief on this, and they included a snapshot of Metro and Metro's work back in the day on performance-based assessment.
Because remember, you and other teachers were finding other ways to have kids do work that was more meaningful and assess how well they're doing that work. And actually, you were ahead of your time because, law schools now and colleges are stopping using some of that standardized test. What do they want them to do? I take it this bill would not be ordering an end to the testing, right?
No, this would be, I think, more of the phase of a task force, beginning to look at the impact of the time spent preparing for high stakes tests, the money spent on high stakes tests, and beginning to think about other ways we can do this. I think CEA's ideal bill would have included a pilot where some schools were given permission to do more performance-based assessment. I don't think that's in the current bill, but I know there's always wrangling as we get things out of committee and to the General Assembly. Massachusetts has done it, so we do have a model up there of
what have they done?
They, I believe, have a pilot where some schools in Massachusetts are kind of quote unquote allowed to do this performance-based assessment model rather than just kind of living and dying by the high stakes test results that the state requires.
And is that younger grades or older? Because Metro is high school.
Yes.
Like the parents freak out. So the freak out you get from the conservatives, one is that if parents say how schools won't accept them colleges because you don't have the tests they need, although that's changing. And the second freak out is that we have to be competitive and kids have to learn. They have to be measured by how well they're doing. We have to have some kind of standards that are based on some kind of numbers.
I agree completely, but the data and some of the research, so Metro modeled our work after the Performance Consortium in New York, and there's a consortium of schools in New York City, high schools, that serve the same population as New York City public schools, but they have waivers from the Regents exams. So they are able to use performance-based assessment to measure student growth. And CUNY is researching students who come out of the Performance Consortium schools, and they are doing as good, if not better, at CUNY. So they are absolutely ready for college. Some might argue they are more ready for college because they're actually doing the critical thinking, long-term project research work, presenting their work in front of authentic audiences. Those are the things that we want students to be able to do.
I love seeing the projects. City University of New York is CUNY. If you don't know, you and I have a bias, which is this kind of rigid teach to a test pressure is not the best way to learn people how to be thinking individuals who learn how to learn in part.
Exactly.
And have skills they could take their life in a world that changes so fast so that the job you start with might not even be an industry that you're always in. And it's not just about your job. It's about what kind of parent you are, how you deal with other human beings, and
absolutely. How you're going to engage with society to go up and lobby and testify for a bill, potentially.
And also how you're not going to get ripped off by some predatory lender.
Yes.
I would love to teach that course.
Yes. What's needed. It is needed.
That is so sick. Now they got your cars get stopped in the middle of the road when they give you a loan you'll never afford. It's pretty sick. Anyway, but that's a different subject. We're talking Leslie Blatteau, President of New Haven, Federate teachers. Got a crew. You got a crew going up tomorrow to Hartford? You could do it.
We're going to do it by Zoom.
Or Zoom.
Because you never know when you're going to get called, and there's still plenty of work on the local level that needs to get done. Supporting our members and making sure that needs are met. It's I find it easier to just know when your number is going to get called.
And how do you feel testifying? Because your experience testifying, what do you feel, including in New Haven hearings? Do you like in person better or remote?
I like both. I like to be in the room and see the legislators. There's power to that. There's always the opportunity to have those conversations with people during the downtime, which is a beautiful thing.
That's and by people, not just the legislators who count.
People in the audience.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Fellow citizens, right? Fellow residents.
But what do you like on the upside? The convenience. You can stay home and
the convenience is key. When we're trying to do 20 things in a day and then there's 3 surprises, it does help to be sitting in the office, have all the tools there, and not be sort of isolated in a hearing room up in Hartford. And, so there's pluses and minuses.
How does that relate to teaching? What did we learn about remote teaching?
I mean, that being in the room, being able to observe, being able to have those unplanned conversations, being able to read the cues, all of those things are so necessary when we're trying to meet the needs of our students. And those things were not on the table when we were remote.
And
we weren't
obviously,
able to observe in the way that teachers must be able to observe.
Now, again, you and I have biases.
Yep.
I mean, that's my deep, deep bias. I think that so much of education and life and community is being in person together.
Agreed.
How's
Agreed.
that train left? Are we going to become partially tech creatures? I don't mean that as a joke. Like, it is silly, but that so much of our interaction with each other and with other institutions is becoming online. It's being driven by AI algorithms in terms of recommendations, portals. Is our time over and is it lost? And are we just not going to be human the same way? Is it going to be something new? What it means to be human and what a community is?
I do worry about it, Paul. I'm with you, and it feels, particularly Chicken Little or cynical to describe it in the way that you are. But I also agree with you, and I worry a great deal about what we're modeling for our children. I mean, my daughter sees me on my phone and my computer more than certainly is healthy for her and for me. But the work continues. So I think we have to make sure that we're prioritizing any and every opportunity we can have to be in person, and then knowing that tech is going to be there. It's going to be a tool. It's going to make things potentially, more efficient, perhaps. But we have to center the person-to-person communication.
I want to be community.
I mean, I used to ask that question when I taught ninth grade world history of what does it mean to be human? And that was pre, full internet takeover. That was 2007, 2008. So that was just when our students were beginning to fully immerse themselves into an online life.
Imagine people ask that of GPT chatbots. So the question is whether the answer would come geared to what the chatbot is programmed to think you want to hear.
Right.
Or whether there's some other agenda by the programmers. That's gone far afield. What about Board of Ed meetings? Should they be in person?
They should absolutely be in person.
Now, why is that?
Because I think to what we're speaking about now, that those opportunities for the community to come together every 2 weeks, people who care about education, who want to be in community, we need that time. And that is dedicated time, not only to interact with our elected and appointed leaders, but it's also time to build community, build coalition with our fellow city residents, fellow educators, parents, students, and just get a sense of who's there. What are you working on? Hey, can you go to Hartford tomorrow? Last night, I couldn't do any organizing for public hearings in Hartford at the Board of Ed meeting, save for my public comment, which was, hey, this coalition is doing good work. Let's keep it up. But if we were in person, I would argue there would be 15, 20 people there, maybe more. We would begin to say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Let's connect. Let's meet next week. What are you doing? Can you join us in Hartford? And it's just, again, those organic conversations.
And what about accountability?
Accountability for our elected and appointed?
Yeah.
I mean, that goes without saying. They would argue, I think, and it's what they're currently arguing, is that they are accountable. They are online having their meetings, doing the order of business that is on their agenda. And that's true. They are. But I think, to your point about what does it mean to be in community with people, we need more from a Board of Education than just working through an agenda. We need to be able to build those relationships. And I recognize that some people have some health concerns, and I, of course, honor those.
But when has that ever been a factor of whether an event takes place? Does the teacher say, well, I have health concerns? Like, well, then you don't come into school, but someone's got to be in the classroom.
Yeah, and teachers with health concerns still come to work every day. They mask up, and they continue, and they push on.
The first reason they were given was, well, this is better because more people are attending. But that made no sense because you could have a hybrid meeting. You could have a meeting online. And we could argue about what attending means. You and I might think something differently from them. We do think something different than what it means to attend a meeting. But if you're saying we like that people can watch the meeting like a TV show, you can still have the TV show.
Oh, we should still stream.
But it used to be in person.
Of course.
So then it became clear, they won't say who, that there's someone who has a health problem, and there's always rumors about whether someone's living in New Haven.
Yep.
Is that a legitimate reason not to hold a meeting in person?
No, that's not enough reason, because those individuals, I mean, I would argue if someone's not living in New Haven, they shouldn't be on the board. But I think if there is somebody with a health concern, they could be part of the hybrid model, and they could participate from remotely. But by and large, the people who are on the Board of Ed, our central office folks, and the community should be sharing space. And 2 weeks ago, President Rivera did indicate that they were moving in that direction. I didn't watch the whole meeting last night. I was sort of in and out, so I don't know if there has been updates. But there were some concerns 2 weeks ago about whether we have the tech for it. I'm sorry, we have the tech for it.
We've been doing this for, I think, 10 years.
And if we don't have the tech for it, then let's get the tech for it as soon as possible, because it is time. It is time.
And Leslie, what was the third bill you had tomorrow? So there's a hearing of the Education Committee on class size, on high-stakes testing. What's the third bill?
The third one is related to the process for charter schools becoming schools. And that, I think, will kind of, I'm going to have to follow up with you with some of the more specifics. But ultimately, this bill, I think, is going to create a faster process and potentially more funding for charters to become schools in the state of Connecticut.
How do you feel about that?
I'm very concerned. I'm also more concerned about another funding bill, HB 5003. First, I want to say that funding bill is awesome because it prioritizes fully funding public education throughout the state. Huge win for public schools throughout Connecticut. However, there's a piece of it that's not getting a lot of attention. A piece of it will put charter schools on a separate funding elevator. So in times of inflation or recession, they will get increased funding where funding for our public schools could potentially flatline based off that inflation, times of inflation or recession. So that funding elevator for charters is something I think we need to keep our eye on. And here's the thing. It's 2023. There are charter schools in the state of Connecticut, charter schools in New Haven. They're not going anywhere. And I'm not here saying that they should be shut down. There are families who are happy with them. There are students who are benefiting from their services. I think if we're at this point where charter schools are going to be getting increased public funding from the state of Connecticut, then we should start having more conversations and have more policy where charter schools are going to be held accountable and they're going to kind of live by the transparency rules that public schools live by. Wilbur Cross serves students who arrive whenever and from wherever throughout the entire school year. I mean, so many of our schools do, but Wilbur Cross is a classic example. There are students arriving from Central America 2 weeks ago, and another 11 students joined the ranks of Wilbur Cross High, and a schedule had to be made for them. There are charter schools in this city that they will not accept new students until the start of the next school year. And it becomes harder and harder to really do a fair comparison of these two models when some are able to create rules that really, allow them to have that stability and have that sense of community. Whereas the rules that we're playing by are, of course, we are open to all. We are true public schools. So I think that has to continue to be a part of the conversation. And I'm hopeful that some legislators are going to hear us when we say, okay, if the public funding is going to go to charters, then let's sit down and really talk about where that money is going, who charter schools are serving, and how we can make sure that we are living by the same rules, the same accountability and transparency policies and processes.
Good luck. Okay. So,
good luck. It's true. I'm an eternal optimist, Paul. You know this.
There are charters and there are charters. There's Common Ground, Common Environmental, very community connected. There's Booker T, which is connected to a historic African American church.
Yes.
And then you have like these kind of corporate style.
Right.
White people teaching
Capital
black
Prep, Achievement First. I mean, Capital Prep's run by an African American man, but Achievement First, Capital Prep,
Yeah. So there are two proposals. Are they still alive? One is to have a boys' school with Boise Kimber.
I believe. I don't know a lot about that one.
That got killed by New Haven, but now he's kind of got it in on the agenda for approval from the state board.
Okay.
Okay.
I've sort of been reading about it on the periphery a little bit.
Yeah, and then there's the one for which most of the Jewish community I know was against, to have a Hebrew language that wasn't Jewish necessarily. What's happening with that one?
That one did not make it. It did not meet the standards, I think, set out by the state. So this year it is no longer a possibility. That's what I heard from the organizers, from the progressive Jewish organizers who were concerned about this possible charter.
Right. I mean, and
I'm grateful to them and their work.
I wrote a story just with the two sides. In my own synagogue, people were so mad at me because they just they hated the idea of the school. They thought I should have just clobbered it. I thought, let everybody have to talk.
Yeah. No, that's one of the things you're good at is putting the information out there and letting people work through it.
Well, some of the information we put out there, Leslie, yesterday was, and this happens from time to time, there were drive-by shootings in East Rock, and it was right around the time kids were going to school. It was early morning, like 8:15. 10 schools went into lockdown. There were 3 in the immediate area. There was Worthing Hooker, both levels of that, and Wilbur Cross. But then a whole bunch of others that were put in lockdown. We got a lot of concern, and because it was in a more white neighborhood, more people were aware of it and complaining to officials, because I know this happens in other parts of town too. There were a lot of concerns raised about how you decide when to go lockdown, how kids feel. It's the second time Hooker School in 5 weeks had that, third time Wilbur Cross is out of lockdown this year. What did you take away, and what did you hear yesterday? And they did arrest someone, by the way. I don't know whether this matters to you. Like within hours, they found young people that had the guns in the car. What do you think about this?
It's so complicated. I mean, first and foremost, students, staff, educators, everyone who steps into a school, family members, they deserve to feel safe in school. The issue is how people feel safe and what information they need and what policies they need varies, right? So what feeling safe it means to people in school is different from person to person. So that complicates things. But first and foremost, we have to prioritize safety. So I'm not surprised or that upset that a lockdown is called if there is open gunfire, from cars as kids are arriving to school.
And because they were still driving along a pathway, that's why out of
they didn't know where they
caution.
were going, right?
Some people said it was overdone. Okay, keep them inside, but these were kids locked in a bathroom at East Rock Magnet. I don't know.
I think they shifted to the modified lockdown,
Afterwards.
which means no one comes and goes and business as usual inside
Right,
the
so
school.
I think the first 20 minutes or so or whatever was the full, because we originally said it was all partial because that's what schools told us. We got calls from one parents that they had my kid locked in the bathroom for 20 minutes. So they said, okay, we only got that information at that time. It was first full. So you're not concerned about that because they're trying to keep people safe.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I would be complaining if there was gunfire in the neighborhood and they didn't lock down a school. I would be hearing from members and community members about that too. So I think, it's a lousy comparison because gun violence is much more serious than snow days. But you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right? If you don't call a snow day, you're screwed. If you call a snow day, you're screwed because someone's going to have an opinion.
Some people say why the immediate area and
I mean, there was a question about why so many schools.
Yeah, and their answer was that the call was coming in that they were shooting each other and still driving into other neighborhoods.
And again, if there's an abundance of caution, I think that's okay. I think what we do after the lockdown should be discussed more. So what are we doing after the lockdown to check in with members of our community, make sure they understand why a lockdown was called, make sure that they are okay, make sure that no one's trauma has been triggered. I mean, we have been through so much as a city with gun violence. I mean, it's a small city, so we feel the impacts much more than say, a New York or Chicago. I mean, maybe not much more, but it's a small city, so it just absorbs things more quickly, right? As a nation, teachers and students, we just kind of have come to accept that when is it going to happen to us? We really, to walk into a school every day, maybe not the kiddos, but the teachers, we love our jobs and we love our students, but there is a resignation of today could be the day. And I'm not trying to be morbid or rain on people's parade, but this is a reality that folks who work in schools know comes with the job, just because it's such a disaster nationally. So, I think because we're carrying these burdens, we have to make the time to check in with our communities after things like this happen. And not to overuse the restorative justice circles, but circle up with your kiddos, circle up with your teachers if you have a staff meeting, and just say, how's everybody doing with that? Do you need anything?
Does it happen?
In some places, yes, but not nearly enough. And I think because people want the information, and we don't need every last bit of detail of that violates people's privacy potentially. But when people don't have information, their stress goes up. When people can see things clearly and have access to information, their stress goes down. So let's give people some information so they understand why it was called, they understand we're safe now, and we move forward. I mean, I'll share, because let's be real here, that this is something that students across the city are used to. And we know that it got a lot of attention because it happened at East Rock. And it's terrible that it happened in East Rock, but it happens all over our city all the time. My daughter goes to Hill Central. I was on pickup, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And there was gunshots at pickup. And I literally heard it, thought to myself, that was gunshots. And we were just about to leave. And I hand in my hand, right? And then I see the principal, and the principal says, okay, call lockdown. And we all just go back into the school and sit in the library. And there are some students who are fine. There are some students who are crying. And, this isn't a this isn't a first.
A few weeks ago.
This happened a few months ago. Yeah, and it's not the norm, because it's not the norm. I don't want to say that, but we are used to it. We are used to gunfire in our neighborhoods, and we know what to do. But that wasn't in the news. That was just another day at Hill Central. And I will say the leadership team there did an extraordinary job of taking care of students, family members, teachers, because all of us now were sitting in the library and just making sure that we were okay during that time of transition. I mean, because that's particularly challenging. And same for East Rock neighborhood yesterday. People are arriving to school. You don't know who's there, who's not there. Same thing for us at Hill Central. We were leaving school. We don't know who was there, who's not there. And this gets at that we are not okay community-wise, that people who do have guns and who are making choices to engage in this are doing it at 3:00 and at 8:00. Like, come on, guys. Like, I'm not naive. I know that stuff goes on in the city. But at some point, when are folks going to make a choice? Like, keep it after hours at least. Like, leave people alone. Let children go to school. Because when people say neighborhoods are dangerous, at the end of the day, young children live in those neighborhoods, and young children are not dangerous. And, children are not dangerous. Children deserve safe communities. And I feel like it's really a time of reckoning for us to call upon the folks who are engaging in this and really let them know the impact that they're having on most likely friends and family of theirs, right? When we think about how far reaching it is throughout our city, I'm not the person for this. I see the impact, and there are people much smarter and much more nuanced and much more able to negotiate the tension here that are doing the work. But it's got to continue. It's got to continue because it's really reaching the tipping point where you worry about where we're going to go from here. And I don't want to see people leave the city as a result of it. The people who have the means and people who are committed to stay in the city deserve at least some peace of mind that pick up and drop off and school day is sacred. Come on,
We're talking about that on Dateline New Haven, WNHH New Haven's home for community radio. We're with Leslie Blatteau, president of the New Haven Federated Teachers. Say we're not okay. There have been all these stresses in the schools, not New Haven, everywhere.
Yeah.
And especially starting the pandemic, but bringing to light what was already festering a huge national mental health crisis for teens and younger kids, and that's spilling over to what the pressures teachers are facing. So first I wanted to ask you about fights in schools. Seems like there's just a lot of them, and not always guns, not usually guns, but there's violence. And we never, you talked about like how we talked about, at first we weren't going to write about the East Rock thing yesterday because it happened in East Rock as opposed to other neighborhoods, but then there were so many people calling and it was 10 schools and it was 20 shots. So like it did seem unusual, but you're right that there's this sort of balance between what's become normal. Do we accept as normal, or do we want to freak out people? So like, should we have written about, there was a fight at HSC and we had the video. One of the kids took the video, and that kind of elevates the people in it, and the principal got attacked. And then they said, don't write about it because that's not the only thing that happens in the course of a day. It matters, but if it's happening a lot, that sort of makes it almost like dog bites man. But shouldn't we be caring that dog is biting man? What do you think about, Leslie, if you were in my shoes? How would you look at how to cover the stuff, and more broadly as a community, how should we think about this violence taking place in the schools right now?
Yeah, I think first I just want to respond to say that you and the team at the Independent is doing such good work highlighting the things that many people would not consider news stories of a day in the life.
Well, we care a lot about
teacher.
what happens in the school,
and that is huge.
And
because,
we always lead with that over any of the other.
Yeah, and that is needed, and that is welcome. I think to all of us, it's always welcome to see just the regular thing that happened over at Edgewood or over at Obama School. And it's like, oh yeah, like the regular is not even regular. The regular is extraordinary. But then the question is, do we highlight when things are really going wrong?
Or when do we and how?
Yeah.
Because we do care, but sometimes there's this narrative that gets taken that really isn't accurate. That's all that happens.
And we know that that's not all that happens. Right. I mean, maybe we got to get kids to report on it and get it from their perspective. I mean, high school students have the insight, the perspective, the skills, the communication ability to maybe pull out from this what we are missing possibly. And then it's not adults sort of.
It was a high school student who gave me that video.
Okay. But I would want them to write about it. Right. Or do a podcast about it because they, with a caring adult alongside of them.
I love that idea. And what about as a community? What's going on with this violence in schools? How bad is it?
I think routines were disrupted during the pandemic, which is the understatement of the century. And rebuilding routines is far more difficult than most people realize. And we are still, even though we're, almost 3 years, we are still rebuilding routines. I think about it just as a parent. When I look at pictures from March 2020, Francine looked so little. And it's like, oh my God, she's been in the pandemic since she was tiny, since she was 4.5. And that's just her. But for all of our children, this has been a chunk of their life now, where routines and norms have been upended, and loss has been exacerbated on multiple levels. So we got to get real about how we're going to rebuild routines. And rebuilding routines is not just doing what we used to do. Rebuilding routines is recognizing things are broken, things are lost. We have suffered, and let's come together collectively and think about how do we want to rebuild. And I think there's still an opportunity for that. And I think in classrooms and in schools across the city that is happening. But I think we have to be more intentional with it, because our kids are letting us know that they don't feel okay and that their needs are not being met.
And it is accurate to say there's a lot more violence taking place in the schools than there was.
It's a good question. I'm trying to get data on it. Based on what I'm hearing, I would agree with you. But as we always hear, this is a data-driven district, and I think it would be great to have some real numbers to compare.
Was it always reported? Is there real data? I'm just thinking we hear about it so much more. Partly there are more cell phones now, so part of there's the TikTok challenges.
Right, and we see the evidence of it more.
Right, with the fire stuff, that's a TikTok challenge thing, right, in the bathroom. But
right.
But some of the stuff that, I guess there were always times when someone who used to go to a school, or as two groups of kids from different schools will come after hours, or when things are letting out, and I guess maybe start a fight.
There's always going to be conflict. We're not so unrealistic to think there's not going to be conflict. But I think when we have increased disengagement, when we have increased disengagement, which we have, and we have increased trauma and loss, which we have, those two things together are a bit of a perfect storm for creating and exacerbating the complications of the conflict. Throw the internet into that too, and it's particularly messy.
And then
I think that's where we are.
About SRO, school resource officers, cops assigned to schools. It's been an interesting debate, because when they've polled everyone, they want them. But the voices,
who's they?
When the Board of Ed did a survey.
Oh, I see.
Of teachers, parents, the kids, they say they want them. But then the people who speak up, who are motivated, clearly are more critical. They're saying this makes us feel like there's something dangerous about our school. It criminalizes, gets into the pipeline. Then other people say, well, the officers become someone they can trust and actually keep the lid on things and stop things from getting worse. What's your take on it?
I think that first we have to agree on some common language. So SRO, school resource officer, I think from my perspective is a uniformed, armed police in a school, right? And I think in New Haven, only Cross Hill House and Career, I think, are schools with SROs, with uniformed, armed New Haven police in their schools. There is compelling data to show that the presence of armed police in our schools does disproportionately impact Black and brown kids. That data is there, and it's real. And we have to acknowledge that data. And if we're feeling like we have to have police in our schools, then we have to mediate the negative impacts of how that's impacting our Black and brown kids. We must do that. But I also want to shift, because most of our schools don't have armed police in them, okay? Most of our schools, some of our schools have a school security guard who is unarmed, city employee, city Board of Ed employee, who in an ideal world should be part of that school community, know the name of every kid, know the name of every teacher, and be able to help prevent violence before it even starts. So that's the ideal world that we're not there, because we're down security guards. It's an issue in the city. We don't have enough just regular, not cops, but regular school security guards in our school.
There was an incident, there wasn't a security guard there.
Right. I know, a lot of schools share them, and it sort of feels a little bit like whack-a-mole, there's a fight over at this school, send 3 over. But we got to get into the proactive, not to the reactive mode here. And I know that there are real, staffing shortages, and this, I'm not casting blame, but I think we got to get to a point where our goal is an embedded community member, security guard in a school who works on the relationship building and the violence prevention, so that we don't get to the need of needing to suspend kids or needing have teachers getting injured because they're getting stuck in the middle of a fight. But really, the security guard can be the eyes and ears of the institution in a way that's focused on the needs of the children, the needs of the school community, and really honors child development, and also has an anti-racist perspective. Like, they could get trained in anti-racist, anti-bias.
Well, yeah, because I noticed that was security. This is in the aughts, so this is a while back when they went to cross. They just said, the black and brown kids got searched and they didn't.
Right.
There weren't that many white kids in school, but the white kids never got searched. My daughter, I was really upset. She once brought a cake in and she had a knife. They didn't wander, and other kids with smaller knives or things were getting caught and things.
And that's not blaming the individuals. That's just acknowledging the systemic racism that we live
in America. So
let's acknowledge it and let's really work to rebuild our communities. I mean, ultimately, what's going to reduce the behavior incidents and the violence that we're seeing in our schools is increasing staffing and allowing people to stay in one building so they have those relationships. Kids need to have the more relationships students have with caring adults, the better they are. So let's flood our schools with resources. That's a quote from David Weinrab. He's been a champ on the state testimonies. He's been hitting the public hearings left and right. And he keeps saying, let's flood our schools with resources. And I couldn't agree more.
What does resources mean?
Resources is a certified teacher and paraprofessionals in the classrooms that require them. Special ed, staffing, robust and to meet the needs of our students with IEPs. Restorative practices counselors so they can do the mediations with students. We often know when students are going to fight. Students will let us know, either themselves or their friends, that so-and-so and so-and-so are not okay. And they'll send the smoke signals of what might be happening 20 minutes from now when lunch happens. But oftentimes, because we've got 3 vacancies and we've got half a school nurse and we've got half a security guard, there just isn't the capacity to grab those 2 or 3 individuals and say, come on, sit down. I'm not going to let you fight. Let's work this out right now. And if we had the restorative practices folks, we have Cameo and a team of 3. It's just not enough people. If we had somebody dedicated in each building who, again, was working with the school security guard, working with, the dropout prevention person, working with the assistant principal, we would be able to really call those kids in and say, let's work this out, because I don't want you going on suspension. I don't want you getting arrested. I don't want you missing, the SATs next week, because for good or for ill, we know you need them to get into UConn. So let's figure this out now. And again, this is about the proactive versus the reactive. And I think we're going to be able to get there, but it's going to take pushes on multiple levels, on the local level, state level. And I think it's got to be a federal push too. At some point, the federal government can and should do a GI Bill for teachers. That if someone is coming in, if someone is graduating high school and entering college, or graduating college and entering a master's program, they should not take on a penny of debt to become a public school teacher. When can and will the federal government prioritize this? Because why would someone with prospects take on that debt to potentially become a certified educator in the state of Connecticut when they could go through the same amount of training, spend the same amount of money, and take a job that they would make 75% more, or possibly double. So let's remove the obstacles and really create pathways so that we're looking not just to next year and the year after, but we're looking 5, 10, 15 years out. And that's where I think I'm very proud of our work as a union, because people who are retiring now, they are retiring with pension, with healthcare benefits, and with things that they have because of the hard work of unions that come before us.
How would the GI Bill work exactly?
Good question. I mean, we know that the United States of America spends an extraordinary amount of discretionary funding on the military. And we could take a small part of that and provide grants to people who commit to becoming, to majoring in education or majoring in a content area and getting their teacher certificate, and then moving on to work in schools for X amount of years. I know that would then take an investment in the teacher retention piece to actually hold them, because we don't want TFA on, from the U.S. government,
America, yeah.
Right? We want people to commit to teaching, but also that we have to think, is it fair to be asking teachers to do 37 and a half years to qualify for the fullest pension that they can get.
Wow.
That's what we're asking our teachers. If you're going to enjoy that benefit,
who are burnt and they really need to be going at 30 and they feel they can't.
But this is a state decision, and I think and the state's a catch-22 for them, because if they lower it, then we're going to be short teachers. But at some point, we got to be real about what we're asking of our educators right now. The job has changed from 30 years ago. There are different expectations. There are different demands on our body and on our mind. And I think I'm not sure 37 and a half years is as realistic as it was. I don't know if it was ever realistic, but it's certainly not as realistic as it was 30 years ago.
All right. Talking to Leslie Blatteau, president of New Haven Federated Teacher Public School parent. How many years were you a teacher in the schools?
16.
And that was before you became president?
Yep. 2007 to 2022.
All right. So you talked about keeping teachers, when teachers can go. What's the latest with the problem we've had with losing teachers? All teachers are leaving the profession nationally. It's a problem. I had the impression, tell me if I'm wrong, it was a bigger problem in New Haven because suburbs were able to poach teachers who were willing to remain. Like, we all know teachers who just had to get out of the job, especially after the pandemic and all the stuff going on. But there are other teachers who stayed in the profession but went to the suburbs.
Yes.
Maybe because they got paid more.
I think a combination. It was clear that they were going to make $15,000 more by transferring, but it wasn't just the pay. It was and this goes to the class size bill that we're going to be testifying on tomorrow. Their class sizes for first grade are 20 kids.
And what are ours?
Ours are our class cap for K1 is 26, and then either second or third grade and up is 27. So, for example, Francine started her class with 20 kids in the class at the beginning of the year, and now it's 26. And her teacher is doing extraordinary work with a large group of students. But if you're in a suburb, you're going to start with 20 and you're going to end with 20. Because again, those cities aren't the sanctuary city that New Haven is. They're not open and welcoming they would be in theory.
What a plus it is for us too. Like, we've done some stories of Clemente and Truman, and it does seem like these are some awesome kids, and in some cases parents getting involved or bringing a lot of focus, energy, and smarts to our school.
Oh, no, I'm glad that people are coming to our schools, right? It's certainly, I'm not blaming them, but we need more resources.
Yeah.
And if there was a potentially a state-imposed class size cap, then it would be all the more reason for New Haven to advocate and say, okay, that cap we're going to phase in, over the next 5 years. Well, let's make sure we have the resources, because that's going to mean we're going to need another teacher at this school. We're going to need another teacher at that school.
You got a 15% increase over how many years for teachers?
For our salary, 15% over 3 years, average.
But wasn't there also an issue of how there were problems when people got to get step increases, so it's actually not as big as increase as it looks, or do I have that wrong?
So it depends on where you are. So what we did with the next contract is we guaranteed step movement for everybody. So everybody moves up a step each year of the contract. And we took the salary schedule from the previous contract and we added money to it. So you're not just moving up a step on the old contract, you're moving up a step, and all of the steps have more money than ever before.
And obviously that was a big deal. Is it a big enough deal? Is it going to keep teachers here?
I think it is going to keep teachers. I've had some one-on-one conversations with folks where it is a winner for them, and they are able to see themselves staying. Again, though, it's not just about the pay; it's about the working conditions too. So I think teachers will be more likely to stay if we are able to retain and recruit more, so that the vacancies are filled. Because this is where people begin to lose hope, is when it's just, oh my God, that they're facing their students and saying, knowing that it's third period and I'm the first teacher you had today. That gets demoralizing in a very real way. And not to mention the social, emotional, mental health supports that we know our students need. But I think, I want to remain hopeful that the raises are going to help meet that need. And then, we're working collaboratively with the district on the staffing committee to make recommendations to finance and ops and ultimately the full board that, if we're going to really staff our schools in a robust way, in a visionary way, this is what we want. And I'm excited about the prospects of that. I know ultimately that requires funding, but I think if we're not funding our schools, what are we prioritizing here? And this is something that's frustrating to see. Governor Lamont's decision to flat fund public ed, to take away money from public higher ed, to not fully fund childcare. There are 12 billionaires in the state of Connecticut who collectively have $75 billion among them. Their wealth has increased by $15 billion since the start of the pandemic. and they pay a 5% tax rate. Middle class folks, 15%, working class folks, 25%. We have an upside down tax structure in this state. It needs to be turned around. The billionaires aren't going to go anywhere. There's this migration myth. There's a UConn professor who's doing research to show it doesn't make them go away. They're quite content to stay here. It's time that the ultra wealthy pay what they owe so that we can fund social services in this state, because the divide between the ultra rich and everybody else is really becoming more and more stark and more alarming. And I would think that when we have things like this happening yesterday, in the corner East Rock, on a corner in the East Rock neighborhood, where our community is in crisis, I would think more and more of us could come together and really galvanize on this issue of there is funding. I mean, you say, where would the money come from for the National GI Bill for teachers? Similarly, there is funding in the state of Connecticut for us to push robust social services, education, healthcare, housing. These are possible, and it would not hurt those 12 billionaires. It just wouldn't. I refuse to accept that they're somehow going to be hurt by paying a higher tax rate.
Leslie Blatteau, President New Haven Federation of Teachers on Dateline New Haven. So the union, strange bedfellows, and the Republican Party are pushing for an fully elected Board of Education.
Well, let me clarify. We're in the mid-range, what we landed on. The union officially proposed 4 elected, 3 appointed, and the mayor as a non-voting member.
And why do we want more elected members?
I think this goes back to the engagement piece. When people see that they have a chance to have a seat at the table, I think that there is going to be more engagement. There is going to be more involvement. Right now, as you know, because you've reported on it, the mayor is the only member of the Board of Ed with a student in New Haven Public Schools. And, that's alarming, because when it came time to the public meetings that were happening for the superintendent search, I didn't know about it as a parent until the Monday of that week of the meetings. So we need to have people who are parents and family members in the school system to really be the eyes and ears.
But we haven't had anyone run for the Board of Ed who has a kid in the schools.
No, but I think we could do better on that. For one, that's why we want to move it up to 4. People thinking that they have to essentially run a citywide race really could kind of damper people's optimism.
Saying divide it into 4 and not make them citywide districts?
Yeah. Well, right now it's split in half, right?
So split into 4.
So if we split into 4, people could be more connected to their constituents. I mean, we have democracy schools in this city to help people understand how the city government works. Let's build a pipeline of potentially engaged parents to get a sense of who might want to run and give them some tools and training to step into the role.
Could the New Haven Federated Teachers become an engine to convince parents to run?
Yeah, I think teachers could absolutely become an engine to build the relationships with folks who could potentially run.
Like, why hasn't the New Haven Union supported anybody for that office?
Well, like you said, when we were having our pre-interview discussions, 14 months, it's on the to-do list. I think it's, we're kind of putting our opinion out there in the name of democratically run schools by trying to, have this proposal be heard by the Charter Revision Committee and heard by the Board of Alders. I think if and when it gets passed, we would absolutely hit the ground running and do some organizing work with our community to see who potentially could run. I know there are people out there who would be interested and who would be effective. And
I wait all this time to ask a big question. We're searching for a new superintendent. So, first of all, what are your thoughts on the person who appears to be going to be Madeline Negron? It seems like the former was an assistant superintendent here. She's now in Hartford. She left because of the whole Berks disaster. It sounds like they want to bring her back. Am I missing something? Is she okay?
I've heard that. I've heard a lot of rumors, which I won't speak to directly. I don't know Dr. Negron well. I know of her from her time here. I think she was principal at Career for some time. So, if she is, well, one, as we know, if it's a done deal and she does get the job, I'm going to feel for her, because she's going to come in with the baggage that it wasn't a transparent or fair process, which stinks, because the goal of this Board of Ed is that this is going to be a transparent and fair process. So she's going to come in with that obstacle right in front of her, because people are going to think it was rigged. And whether it was or not,
what do you
that's
think
for
of
us to
her?
observe.
Oh,
Pardon me?
What do you hear about her? What's your sense of her?
I not that much, to be honest. And that's not a diss. That's, I know she's assistant superintendent in Hartford. I work closely with our union brothers and sisters up in Hartford. I know they have some struggles with the leadership team up in Hartford. I know that New Haven is a union town. New Haven is a town where unions have a seat at the table and collaborate with management in a way that might be different than other places. So I'm just going to assume that whoever does get that job is going to know that, and we're going to be able to work collaboratively and really try to center the needs of students, teachers, and community as we continue this work.
And one issue is because most of the news we hear are people who are Latino or Latina. That a plurality of students now are Hispanic in New Haven schools, and soon it's going to be an outright majority. Is it time to have an Hispanic superintendent?
I think it's time to have a superintendent who wants to commit to New Haven, who's going to be responsive. I mean, it would be great if we had a Latino superintendent. It's also great if we don't, and that person is right for the job, because I know they would have somebody on their executive team who is Latino as well. I mean, I think it's a team of people. And I don't think the top person has to check a specific box on language or ethnicity to fulfill the job. I think it would be a milestone, and it would be historic, and it would be awesome, and it would signal to our Spanish-speaking Latino community and students and families that they are seen, heard, and can be communicated with. But that can also happen if the superintendent is not Spanish-speaking Latino, Latinx. So, it's more complicated than just that. That's one piece to the puzzle. And, I'll leave it there.
All right, Leslie Blatteau, you've been now 14 months. You came as part of a change team, very democratic process. All these people you organized to be involved in union election, and it ended up, I thought, in a really good place where the people, the old guard who left, were respecting what you're bringing in, hoping you're going to do well with really new ideas and blood. 14 months later, is there anything that has surprised you? Have you evolved in your thinking on anything? How does it look now compared to when you took the job?
Well, it looks a lot. I'm able to think beyond the day-to-day, which is
That's
a
nice.
gift. When we started, it was, 500 staff out in the first week of January because the Omicron was hitting hard. So that feels like a blur. But I think what surprises me, I guess, well, let me start first with how much I love the day-to-day work. I love being able to connect with members, hear members' concerns, really try to support people to work through their problems, solve their problems, and make sure that they know their contract and feel like they are part of the union. I mean, that's what we ran on. We didn't want people to think, oh, the union's going to fix it for me. No. We are all the union. And I think that showed in our process for preparing for contract negotiations. We had open door. We welcomed people into working groups. I think it showed when we were concerned that the board might not be willing to negotiate with us, and we shared information with our members and really energized them to be part of that process. So I think that piece has been a beautiful thing to be working alongside our union members to really demand the things that we know are going to benefit our schools and our students. The thing that I guess is kind of delighting me and surprising me is how much of this work is that we are in coalition with folks around the state, and how much AFT National has been a champion for us, supporting us to do this work. So one of the reasons why we're able to organize our coalition to testify at the state level is because we got a grant from AFT to hire an organizer, an education justice organizer. So this person is kicking butt, building relationships with teachers, parents, community members, and we're seeing organizing that really hasn't happened in a long time, of rank and file members, submitting written testimony, logging onto Zoom. After a long work day, they're home at 4:00 and they're testifying in support of fully funded schools. They're testifying in support of Husky for Immigrants. They're testifying in support of rent caps. They're doing the things that we know are going to benefit our students and their families, and then ultimately improve working conditions, learning conditions as well. So it's been really exciting to be able to be part of that statewide coalition work, and with the support of our national union, because our national union sees it. I mean, how does Chicago, LA, and Boston, how are they able to push things in the way that they are? Because they have that community coalition. And it's something that I know there are community members in New Haven who care deeply about our schools, But I'm really hoping, that people will see the union as and our union members as on their side when it comes to making sure that we have the resources that our schools deserve.
All
and
right.
that's ongoing work.
Leslie Blatteau, the work is ongoing. Thank you for making time to come on Dateline New Haven. Hope you'll be coming back to fill us in again.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Harry Droz, on the snow day, keeping the shows going on WNHH. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just
You're listening to the Tom Pickens Show on WNHH LP 103.5 FM. Your home for community radio.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Just before we went on air, we were discussing history to some degree, and this is the end of Black History Month. But I call this month actually Black History Month, Black Her Story Month, because again, how do we kind of understand our collective kind of commitment and not be distracted by words, and just understand how the spirit is moving Today, we're going to be not necessarily metaphorical, but really talk about history and her story, not in terms of folks that are on the planet today, and in terms of honoring our ancestors. But what about our future family, the future collective family of mankind? How do we kind of decide that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness will be available to all moving forward? Specifically, we're going to talk about, if not a solution, a collective solution, or what happens, how do we kind of create and establish a collective solution to Alzheimer's disease? Uh, Today we call it Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and tomorrow we might call it something else. But the fact remains that people are living longer, and believe it or not, over 6 million people currently are living with Alzheimer's disease. So certainly, if you're listening to this show, you know someone, someone that you know knows someone that's been afflicted. And but more importantly, this is a proactive show about the future. What is the impact of clinical research and science and the science of discovery? And we're so blessed to have Dr. Ryan O'Dell with us. Dr. Ryan O'Dell is a doctor, assistant professor at the Yale Alzheimer's Disease Research Unit, Department of Psychiatry, Yale University School of Medicine. We're blessed to have Vanessa Clayton, Community Diversity Engagement Research Associate at the Yale Alzheimer's Disease Research Unit, Department of Psychiatry, Yale University School of Medicine. And we're joined by Reverend Dr. Leroy O. Perry Jr., pastor of St. Stephen's AME Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program, and Reverend Elvin Clayton, pastor Walters Memorial AME Zion Church and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. Welcome and good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
And so, again, just before we jump in with Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry to kind of share with us some thoughts and to establish us in terms of this historical perspective, just let me just say this is a tremendous show about solutions, collective solutions. We don't have to just honor or pray, but we can take prayerful action and faith in our actions. Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, kick us off a little bit about we know that folks are living longer and what it might take, this impact of this disease, and how we can kind of challenge people and make sure that that we're not overlooked and lost in the shuffle, so to speak.
Thank you, Tom. I think this is a very important show for us because a lot of our seniors are facing early stages of Alzheimer's. I think this show will enlighten our audience with regards to risk factors, environmental and genetic, and possibly point to new therapies that are available. And this information doesn't normally get to our community, so I'm very happy that Ryan and Vanessa are here to kind of wade us through this maze, because it is really difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Clayton.
Thank you, Tom. And I was looking and I heard your first thought or your first question, that word was overlooked. The challenges of our seniors, that make sure they're not overlooked.
Yes.
And one of the ways that we make sure that doesn't happen, we got to be in close contact with them, visit them often. If you have a parent that doesn't live with you, you got to make sure someone is visiting them often, daily. Also, you got to make sure they're up to date with their meds, because sometimes an older person may not take the medications. Make sure they're eating properly, and you may have to do some things that they may not want, like taking their the car away. You know, all of these things are part of what we need to do to make sure that they're not overlooked and abused. Watch their money. Check out their finances. So that's where my head is with this area.
Well, absolutely. Just what you mentioned, a few friends crossed my consciousness just as you were speaking, that who family members had to act in the way that you just suggested. Dr. O'Dell, good morning. Kick us off a little bit more about your work as a researcher, and actually how, if you don't mind, how you became interested in this research of this really challenging but so impactful area of clinical study, and if I can just throw in why it's personally important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. So a little bit of background for me.
I did my medical school and graduate training in SUNY Upstate Medical University, so out in Syracuse, New York. I was there for almost a decade doing this training, and I did my PhD training in basic science research, more in the field of developmental neurobiology. It was a lot of microscope work, studying the effect of certain proteins on mouse brain development. So, really nothing to do with Alzheimer's disease or clinical trials at all. But, as I went through medical school, I found I really was interested in all things psychiatry. I liked all the rotations, child psychiatry, consult services, inpatient, outpatient, but really, took a shining to, geriatric psychiatry, and specifically, geriatric psychiatry in the context of a cognitive disorder such as Alzheimer's disease. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized how much of a need there was, not just from a clinical perspective, but a research perspective. We need to better understand the disease process, what drives it, what causes it, but also try to develop more efficacious treatments, things that work to actually halt or at least slow the progression. So with that in mind, I joined the psychiatry residency program at Yale here from 2017 to about 2021. And that's when I started working with Dr. Christopher Van Dyke and Dr. Adam Mecca, here at the Yale Alzheimer's Disease Research Unit. And, they really gave me the time and opportunity to kind of shift gears completely and start working on, learning more about brain imaging studies and clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease. So then I finished the residency training, did a fellowship in geriatric psychiatry, which is, here in New Haven, based primarily out of the West Haven VA. Continued to work with the ADRU, in the field of Alzheimer's disease. And then finally, after 15 years of training, started here as faculty, this past July 2022 as a geriatric psychiatrist and cognitive disorder specialist. So, I do have to say, my decision to completely shift gears from basic science research to, clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease is one, that's been very fulfilling. I don't regret it at all. I said earlier, there's a really, big or huge unmet need in this field that we're all working towards. And, I've really enjoyed all my interactions with the research participants, my clinical patients, their families, caregivers. This is a disease that affects not just the person, but the family, the community, the healthcare system, in a lot of significant ways. So something I'm really passionate about.
Absolutely. And just before, and we are going to delve into the AHEAD research program and studying how folks can kind of get involved with that. But Vanessa, kind of same general question. How did you decide to kind of get involved with this really significant and impactful research?
First of all, thank you for inviting us and highlighting this important issue. I could say that I am now part of the older population, so I think I need to stay on top of everything that's affecting senior citizens, but not only for myself, for my family, my friends, the communities I serve. I've been involved in other clinical trials over the years, but this is an opportunity, I think, to be in the forefront of making an impact on the Black and Brown communities. However, now this disease does not just affect the older population. I lost a very dear classmate who developed early onset Alzheimer's in his 50s and passed away at age 63. So hopefully the results of this study can also go a long way to prevent Alzheimer's disease somehow or have an impact on the younger population as well. So when I heard about the position, coupled with my science teaching background and my work with community outreach, I thought I could be effective and make a difference.
Excellent. And Dr. Odell, before we go into the AHEAD study, just let's give us a little context, because again, although people have heard the word, but I don't think we can, it would be remiss not to give people a little more context about the disease and how it develops, because again, it's an evolving kind of situation, early warning signs, et cetera. So share with us a little bit about your understanding of the disease and how it develops.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very, big and important question. And, there's a bunch I can cover here. So just jump in, let me know if I'm talking too much and we need to move on. But, I would start out with a, brief definition, that Alzheimer's disease is defined as, a slowly progressive neurodegenerative disease that causes decline in people's cognition, so their memory and thinking, and their function, their ability to live independently and complete, daily tasks. It is the most common form of dementia, or common type of dementia. And as you mentioned, there's over 6 million Americans currently diagnosed. And unfortunately, as the population ages, that number is projected to more than double to about 13.8 million people living with Alzheimer's disease by about the year 2060 is the estimate we currently have. And I'd also say maybe here's a good place to pause and point out a few definitions. Like, these are things that come up pretty frequently in the clinic and in the research environment. Somebody might come in and say, one doctor said I had a diagnosis of dementia, or my loved one has a diagnosis of dementia. Somebody else says I have Alzheimer's disease. What's going on? What's the difference? So just to point out here, dementia is not a specific disease, but it's what we call a syndrome, or a group of symptoms that typically kind of occur together. And the technical diagnosis, for dementia is characterized by these objective, measurable impairments in cognition. That could be memory, language, judgment, problem solving, really any aspect of cognition that of course represents a decline from previous levels of functioning, but also interferes with somebody's ability to function independently. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, that could manifest as maybe needing assistance with driving, managing bills, medications, those sort of things. And maybe another term to point out here, which we might, throw around today, or other listeners have heard, is called mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. So mild cognitive impairment, I think of, with mild cognitive impairment and dementia as a spectrum, with MCI being a little bit earlier on that spectrum. And technically, a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, is defined as having those same objective deficits or impairments in cognition, similar to that, criteria for dementia, but the individual is still fully functional and independent with all their, aspects of daily living. So that's kind of some differences in some technical terms that might get thrown around. But kind of getting back to Alzheimer's disease. So if somebody has a diagnosis of this mild cognitive impairment or dementia, the next logical question might be, well, what's causing this diagnosis? What's causing my memory and thinking changes? And that's where Alzheimer's disease comes in. Alzheimer's disease is the potential cause, or what we call etiology, of the cognitive and functional impairment of the dementia. And as I mentioned before, it is the most common cause of dementia, but there's many other things that specialists need to think about that could be, contributing to the symptoms depending on, presenting signs. There's things like vascular brain disease, Parkinson's disease can cause dementia, something called Lewy body disease, a whole host of things, and things we really need to think about. But maybe a little more information on Alzheimer's disease specifically. You noted it's just characteristically, at least, a disease of, older age. And in fact, age is the largest risk factor to developing Alzheimer's disease. And there's sort of late onset forms where the symptoms start after the age of 65. And as Vanessa mentioned, early onset, where just symptoms happen before the age of 65.
Right.
And let's see, I think maybe a few other helpful pieces. I would say, well, actually, maybe the last, maybe most important thing to talk about here, in relation to the rest of today's talk, the pathology, what's driving, the Alzheimer's disease, and we call neurodegeneration or cell death. So Alzheimer's disease, we typically is characterized by the accumulation of two different proteins, by amyloid plaques and tau tangles. Those are, again, some words people might hear thrown around, plaques and tangles. And so these are two proteins that accumulate or aggregate in the brain and cause the neuronal injury or brain cell death and injury. And the amyloid protein is accumulating outside of the brain cells, while the aggregated tau protein is accumulating, within the neurons. So this is